Hi everyone, I'm Joe and today it's time for me to do my November reading wrap up. November was a really good reading month. I read 16 books in total comprising 4 different genres. So it was a nice varied month as well as a good quality month as well because I enjoyed pretty much everything that I read apart from 1 or 2 exceptions, which is perfectly normal. And the first book I read because of the fact it was just gone Halloween, and that is Night Shift by Stephen King. Now, this is a short story collection. It is one of Stephen King's earlier collections, and actually this exact edition, is the first book by Stephen King that I ever read about 15 or 20 years ago, a long time ago now, and I've reread it a few times since, and I still love this book. I personally think that Stephen King is a better short story writer than he is full-length novel writer, because I think he tends to rumble on basically when given too much space. In short stories he has to keep it more condensed and more to the point, and I think he does that rather well. Frankly, I love this collection in particular. Actually, a couple of his earlier ones I particularly liked. So this is just a great horror short story collection which I would greatly recommend. The second book that I read was Take Back Plenty by Colin, Greenland. Now, the book that I couldn't help thinking of, although only vaguely, whilst reading this, was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Now, this book is about 15 or 20 years older than A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it only really reminds me of it, I think, probably because it has a female main character. It's set heavily on board a spaceship with visits to various planets, and it feels like a travelling sort of science fiction adventure with the focus being on one character, although there are several other characters. So it's vaguely Long Way to Small Angry Planet, but only in some vague feels really. I really liked this overall. It was an interesting book with an interesting plot. It is about one character called Tabitha Jute. She's hiding from the police because of various reasons, and she needs to go to a planet called Plenty. And I'm not going into reasons why you find that out, but I really did enjoy this book. It was well written, had some really fun scenes in it, some quite interesting darker scenes, and just a good mixture of everything you could want from a sort of science fiction adventure fun club. Next up, I read an entire trilogy, and that is the Indranan War trilogy by K.B. Wages. This comprises of Behind the Throne, After the Crown, and finally Beyond the Empire. And Beyond the Empire was actually only released in November, so this is brand new. Now, I'm not going to say too much about these 3 because I will be doing a separate trilogy review in the next month or so, whenever I can actually get around to doing it. Suffice to say, this is a science fiction trilogy with great characters, great plot, great dialogue, great world building. I mean, frankly, everything about this trilogy is fantastic. I really loved this trilogy really badly. This was one of the best science fiction trilogies I've read in a long time, which, considering some of the others, I rate extremely highly as well. That's quite an achievement, frankly. But I'll say more in a separate review. Next up, I read The Murder of Mary Russell and Mary Russell's War, both by Laurie R. King. Now, this is the 14th and, as of the time of filming, the most current book in the Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes series, and this is a short story collection with short stories based from after the second book right up until right before this one. And I'm not going to say too much about the plots of either book because, frankly, what with it being a 14th and a short story collection, it will be a bit too difficult. I mean, what with giving away spoilers and such. Suffice to say, this is a sort of alternative approach, an idea on obviously Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, where Sherlock Holmes has retired. This is talking about the first book, and one day he bumps into a young woman called Mary Russell, who he realises has the same view and the same way of thinking about things that he does. So he sort of comes to rely on her really heavily and starts sort of teaching her, and basically she becomes his apprentice, and they end up essentially solving crimes together, frankly, to put it simply. And every book is really good. This 14th, though, the Murder Mieville, I thought is a really interesting one. There got some really interesting twists and turns, obviously as murder mysteries always do. And frankly, I would really highly recommend this series. And now that I've read it, I can actually do a overall series review at some point in the near future though. Next up, I read Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, both by Agatha Christie. These are Hercule Poirot mysteries, of which there is a whole series of. And frankly, I don't really need to go into depth about why Agatha Christie is so significant within the sort of mystery and crime genre, because she's an iconic name. She wrote a ton of books in it, both on Hercule Poirot and indeed other series like Marple and such. And these are the first two Agatha Christie books that I ever read, and they will not be the last two I ever read, because I really enjoyed both of these. Now, I thought I knew the plots of both books due to the David Suchet television episodes that were made years ago, which I watched with my mum, and I kind of did know them, but not exactly, because of course the television series with David Suchet does do them really good justice and do really well, but it's not exactly what you think. And also, it has been a very long time since I've watched any of them, probably at least 7 or 8 years at this point, so I couldn't actually remember the twists and turns in the books, which of course this type of book has plenty of. But they're just great mystery crime books with Hercule Poirot, who is a Belgian detective who uses his little grey cells, as he likes to say, to solve crime. And I would recommend these, frankly, because they are just fantastic. The next book that I read was Beauty by Sheri S. Tepper. Now, I buddy read this with Rachel, known as Colin on BookTube, and frankly I'm going to be linking her channel in the description box below, and possibly a video by her where she'll talk about this, because I bet before much longer she'll do a really good description of this. Frankly, this book is really hard to describe, especially for me, because I'm not familiar with talking about this, because this is a fantasy, but more importantly this is a fairy tale retelling, but it also has science fiction elements within it. The plot is frankly slightly odd, at least for me, and complex, and I would have had a lot more problems reading it, and frankly I might not have even finished reading this book if it weren't for the fact I was probably reading it with Rachel, because I didn't realise when I started reading it it was a fairy tale retelling. I just assumed it was a general fantasy of some kind. I didn't realise the fairy tale part, and I've read almost no other fairy tale retellings. This is a curious one because it talks about, brings into play multiple other fairy tales like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty and several others, and it's weird but really quite good in its own way. It does take a bit of getting used to though, because it's got some pretty weird writing and weird ideas at times. The next book that I read was Invader by C.J. Cherryh. This is the second book in the Foreigner series, of which there are currently 17 or 18 of, from what I can remember. The series goes along in trilogy, so the books 1, 2 and 3, and obviously the first book is of course called Foreigner, is one sort of overarching storyline. Then it's 4, 5 and 6 is its own sort of overarching storyline, although it is linked overall as well. Obviously this is only book 2, so I don't strictly know how it goes, but that's pretty much how I've heard it goes. And I can't talk about this too much as far as plot goes, because this is a direct continuation on from the first book. Suffice to say, the idea of the book is that humanity has gone to the stars. They sent a colony ship or generation ship on a long-term voyage. It got lost, and the only planet that they could find happened to have an alien species on it, a sentient alien species on it. And this starts off in the first book 600 years later, where humanity has established a small colony on the planet. Most of the planet is inhabited by this alien race. There was a war between us many years ago, and frankly the only reason we survived was because the aliens didn't want to wipe us out unnecessarily, frankly. And now the book is focusing on the main character, who is a diplomat, and his efforts to maintain peace between the aliens, of which there are very large numbers of, and humanity who are living on this one fairly small little island continent. It's curious because there are action scenes, there's lots of talking and sort of quite low-key diplomacy and conversation going on. It does take a bit of getting used to, but I think it's well worth it. I liked it, but I didn't love it. We'll see how the series goes on as I read more of the books, however. The next book that I read was a reread, because frankly I just felt like getting a few rereads done because I want to think a bit familiar, frankly, after the previous few. And the first of which is The Martian by Andy Weir. This was made into a big movie starring Matt Damon last year, was it the year before, which was extremely successful. The book, partially because of the movie, also independently of it, is also extremely successful. Basically, one guy called Mark Watney gets stranded on Mars after a mission goes wrong. His other 5 team members leave. They think he's dead. Obviously he's not. And he has to survive for a very long period on Mars. And whilst on Earth there is NASA and basically the joint efforts of space agencies all over the Earth trying to help him in whatever way possible. And of course his own team are in space flying back to Earth. So there's a lot of things there. It's really well written. Got lots of humour because of the main character, Mark Watney, is extremely sarcastic, and because he's in this isolation so much, he's sort of being sarcastic extremely heavily because it's the only way he can keep himself from going, not going insane, frankly. And he also has lots of sort of technical and fairly simple sort of mathematical engineering and such in it, which I personally find interesting. And this was Andy Weir's first book, and he has released a new book, a second book, since then, although unrelated to this one. Well, I would recommend it if you're looking for something science fiction but not too heavy going. The second reread was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Now, there are going to be a film of this next year in 2018. I think in March or April, I believe, fairly early in the year. So I thought I would reread it so I can remember a little bit in advance of the film. This is basically in a world where the world itself, the economy and the environment is sort of basically sort of collapsed to a certain degree, level, and everybody's pretty miserable, frankly. But there's been created this virtual world, basically, where you wear a headset and these special gloves, and you can interact in this virtual environment. And this world is like the perfect world as such. You know, it's all funny and happy if you want it to be, although obviously it also can be a computer game if you want it to be. It can be the equivalent to real estate and property, and it's whatever you want it to be. This world is, it's run by one company, and there is a competition going, and indeed that is the main focus of the book, where the original creator of this world, which is called the Oasis, upon his death he released a competition that whoever can complete these challenges will basically inherit his fortune and control of the Oasis. And obviously this company is massive, and therefore if you can win it, you are set for life without doubt, and you become extremely significant within the world, both Oasis and real world, because you know you become the owner of a multi-trillion-dollar company, obviously overnight, which is phenomenal. And the main set of characters are all fairly young-ish. They're like 17, 18, and it's just well written, some interesting ideas. At times it does go a bit too much on the sort of geeky, nerdy side of things, we're making a bit too many references at times, which just seems a bit unnecessary, rather than focusing on the plot. Easy to forgive though, and from what I've heard regarding the second book, which is called Armada, frankly I'm not that keen to read that second book because it sounds as though it's gone too much about the geeky stuff. So this book is one that I personally like, and I'm quite happy to have read. The next book that I reread was Afraid by Jack Kilborn. Now, this is a horror thriller. The basic premise of it is that there is what's called a Red Ops team gets loose in a small town in America. A Red Ops team, in the terms of this book, is a sort of specialist military unit that is designed to cause terror or terrorism essentially on enemy countries. However, something goes wrong and this Red Ops team basically creating a terrorism situation in this small town, and it's killing everybody and things are going disastrously wrong. The sheriff is in town trying to sort of solve things. His brother is involved in some way, and it's an interesting plot. It got some pretty heavily action moments in, some quite nasty violent scenes in, although it does work within the book. And I actually did like this book. It's the only book that I've ever read by him, and at some point I do plan to read another by him. It's just a matter of when and how I'm going to get around to it otherwise. The penultimate book is Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, and yes, this is one of the SF Masterworks, or at least my edition is. Now, Starship Troopers and indeed Robert Heinlein, they're both well thought of. Heinlein is generally well liked, although his later books were often dubious, which I haven't read myself. I've only read a small amount of Heinlein, about 4 at this point or so I don't know too much about his writing overall. Frankly, this isn't my favourite of his books. I much preferred The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by him, which was much better. This is a sort of an anti-war novel, and they made a big movie of it quite a number of years ago, like 25 years ago or something, I can't remember when exactly, which is very loosely based on the book. It's based on it more for essentially character names and the overall vague situation. That's about it, frankly. It had some interesting ideas, but I didn't particularly like the writing, frankly, and I thought it was very clunky and very sort of heavy going at points. But then at times it was also extremely light going and very easy. So I don't think this was as well written as it could have been, which I know will not make some people happy, because some people think this is fantastic and revere Heinlein extremely highly. I think he's an okay author. I don't think he's anything truly astonishing, although he was influential within science fiction. The guy wrote some significant books, so you've got to give him credit for that, if nothing else. And finally, the last book that I read was 3 Moments of an Explosion by China Mieville. Now, as you may know, I've read quite a few Mieville books before. I think this is the 7th or 8th book I've read by him now. And so far, every other book by him that I've read, I've absolutely loved. This was okay, frankly. Also, though, this is the first book by him that I've read that is a short story collection as well. And frankly, because it's a short story collection, some of the short stories are indeed extremely interesting, and they've got Mieville's normal, unusual writing style. Some of them, though, are just odd and just don't add anything to the overall book, and it indeed don't mean anything to me personally, although obviously because the short stories all mean different things to different people. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a review of this separately. I've reviewed every other Mieville book I've read separately, so I kind of feel as though I should, but I didn't overly like it though, so that much. It was mediocre at best, so I'm not sure yet what I think of it. Although if you like Mieville, which I obviously do, then you will want to read this, if nothing else, because reading him in a short story format is interesting, and I am very glad I read this despite not being a particularly big fan of it. It's well worth reading just to see him in a different way, in a different mindset, frankly, which I'm glad of. So, with that said, that is it for all the books that I read. I'm not going to try them, hold them up right now, because I'll probably end up dropping them all over the floor, because there's rather a lot of them. But if you've read any of these or would like to, then please leave a comment and we can have a discussion. If you have any suggestions on books that you think I might like based on any of these, then again leave a comment, because I'm always open for more new types of books and new authors, of course. All my social media links can be found in the description box below. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.